Senator from Texas.
Clear that the November the 5th election is prominent on the minds of the Majority Leader, who has used the floor of the United States Senate to make what should be a paid political announcement by the Harris for President campaign. But let me focus primarily on his remarks about the Supreme Court. It's clear that the Majority Leader and our Democratic colleagues don't like the Constitution. They don't like the separation of powers. They don't like the independence of the judiciary, which is really the gold standard for courts worldwide based on the rule of law. What they want is a political branch of government, not one that calls balls and strikes, one that decides cases based on the law and the facts. He talks about how the Supreme Court's reputation has been tarnished. Well, one reason why the Supreme Court's reputation has perhaps been tarnished in the media is because the Majority Leader stood in front of the Supreme Court and called out two justices by name and threatened them if they made a decision that he didn't like. He said they won't know what hit them. Well, that kind of irresponsible rhetoric by the Majority Leader and others is perhaps responsible for people wondering, is the court an impartial institution? I would point out when the court was maybe constituted a little differently, that our Democratic friends didn't say a peep as long as the court was making decisions that they liked and they agreed with from a political perspective. But it is fundamentally irresponsible for the Majority Leader to come here. I guess he's caught up in the fervor of the November the 5th election, having established a political coup and replacing the sitting president with the vice president without going through the democratic process of actually holding elections. He's feeling his oats and perhaps cannot restrain himself. But it's clear that our Democratic colleagues don't like the Constitution and they want to change it. But they know they can't do that because there's not the support across the country or in Congress to do that. So he uses this as a political cudgel in the run-up to the election. It's irresponsible, and unfortunately, I think it reflects the desperation with which the Majority Leader views this upcoming election on November the 5th. Madam President, America's southern border has been in a state of crisis for the last 3.5 years, and our country is desperate for a change in direction. They know that the millions of people coming across, the drugs that have taken the lives of 108,000 Americans last year alone, the crime, the potential vulnerability to terrorist attacks, they are not happy with the status quo, which is what the Biden and Harris administration have provided us for the last 3.5 years. Throughout his time in office, President Biden has shown zero interest in stopping the flood of illegal immigration across our border. He's only visited the border once, and I doubt he will make another trip to the border during the remainder of his term in office. But of course, I don't think he actually talked to the people who could have best informed him of what the problem was created by his very policies. His policies have made it worse, not better, certainly worse than it was under the Trump administration. President Biden is in Texas today. He's in Austin, Texas, and then he will go to Houston, but I doubt he will bother to make a quick trip to the border because the message he has sent loud and clear for the last 3.5 years is he does not care. He doesn't care about the migrants that are swarming into our major cities like New York, Washington, D.C., Chicago, and the burdens those have placed on local taxpayers. about the crime that is associated with the fact that uncontrolled, you don't know who is coming across the border. Admittedly, most migrants are coming here for work, for better life, but the criminal cartels who continue to get rich smuggling people to the border from all around the world also are the ones that smuggle the drugs to the border only to be distributed to kill our sons and daughters who inadvertently take fentanyl, presuming it to be some innocuous drug like a Percocet or a Xanax, only to find out it's a counterfeit pill contaminated by a powerful opioid, fentanyl. Well, what does a potential Harris administration look like? Does it mean more of the same when it comes to the border and immigration policies? Would it signal a new direction? And if so, what would that direction be? Well, the truth is, we already know the answers to those questions. We don't have to wonder about Vice President Harris's policies because she has played a starring role in the current Biden border crisis. These are, after all, Biden-Harris policies. Just a couple of months into President Biden's presidency, illegal border crossings surged as a direct result of the policies that he and Vice President Harris implemented starting the first day in office, mainly by dismantling, piece by piece, the effective policies of the Trump administration. But it became clear that the situation at the border was veering in a dangerous direction, at least in terms of the politics, to President Biden. So he tapped the vice president as the administration's border czar. That's what the headline from Axios, a political publication, heralded at the time. It said, quote, Biden puts Harris in charge of the border crisis. But curiously, it took 3 months before she made her first, and to my knowledge, only trip to the southern border as the individual with the administration in charge of the border crisis. She steered clear of the Rio Grande Valley, which is ground zero to the crisis, but instead did, I guess, what can most accurately and fairly be called a drive-by in El Paso in far west Texas, a very different environment than the Rio Grande Valley. This was Vice President Harris's first and only trip to the border, and it provided an early signal about how little she cared. The Vice President was in Texas last week and will be there again later this week, and once again, no trip to the border is scheduled. You know, if she cared, don't you think she'd show up? Don't you think that's maybe what someone would do to learn about what's not working? What could we do to make it better? But the reality is, over the last 3.5 years, Vice President Harris has proven she has no interest, zero interest, in stopping the alarming number of people streaming across the border, and the results speak for themselves. We've seen a record-shattering number of people flowing across the border because all of the signals being sent by the Biden administration is come by any means you can, come to the border, and we will release you into the interior of the United States. For the last 3.5 years, we've logged more than 8.1 million border crossings, which is unprecedented. During the entire 12 years of the Obama and Trump administrations, the U.S. encountered about half of that, about 6.1 million migrants at the southern border. So that's 12 years we've experienced less than what we've experienced in 3.5 years under the Biden administration. So in those 3.5 years, President Biden and Vice President Harris have not only hit that previous total, but significantly exceeded it. The number of illegal crossings at the border, though, only tells part of the story. It's only one data point. Every day, Border Patrol spots migrants on cameras or sensors, but they're unable to get there to them in time to apprehend them. These are known as gotaways. Since President Biden took office, the agency's recorded more than 1.8 million gotaways. We don't know who these individuals are, where they are now, what their intentions were in coming to the border, and what kind of dangers that they may pose to the American people. Are they terrorists? Are they drug traffickers? Convicted rapists? Sexual predators? We have no idea, and neither does President Biden and Vice President Harris. And they simply don't care. On top of that, the administration stood up a number of new programs to hoodwink the American people into thinking that the problem isn't as bad as it really is, while unbelievably incentivizing even more illegal immigration. One example is the CBP app. That's an app for your phone. Customs and Border Protection app is what it stands for. But this was sold to the American people as a safe and orderly way to manage the border crisis. Instead, this system is being exploited by cartels and criminal organizations. And basically, all you have to do is schedule your appearance at the border, and then the Border Patrol and Customs and Border Protection will allow you to come into the country and release you. But this app requires users located in central or northern Mexico to schedule an appointment. But the cartels have found a way to circumvent that requirement by using a virtual private network, or VPN. This has allowed them to boost their sales pitch and sell CBP-1 appointments to migrants around the world. They're using it to market their services, to encourage more illegal immigration, to enrich these criminal organizations more. Another separate Biden-Harris administration program allows up to 30,000 migrants from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela to enter the United States every month. That's 360,000 a year. No claim of asylum, no claim of credible fear of persecution. You show up and you're allowed to stay. 360,000 a year. That's another magnet for people to come. Record number of illegal crossings, grave humanitarian conditions, dishonest accounting. This has been the reality of the Biden-Harris administration. And there can be no serious doubt that if elected president, Vice President Harris would keep these disastrous policies in place. She's already told us as much. Before serving as vice president, or even as a United States Senator, Vice President Harris was Attorney General of California. In 2015, then Attorney General Harris claimed in an interview that an undocumented immigrant is really not a criminal. Well, she knows better. Our immigration statutes explicitly establish that illegally entering the United States can be a crime. Even though she served as the top law enforcement officer for a border state, she refused to acknowledge even this basic fact. Then when campaigning for president in 2019, then Senator Harris affirmed that she still held that belief. The moderator of a debate asked the candidates to raise your hand if they supported decriminalizing illegal border crossings. And of course, her hand shot up into the air. It's hard to decriminalize something that you don't think's a crime, but we get her drift. Of course, that's only the beginning of Vice President Harris's views concerning the border and immigration. Back in 2018, then Senator Harris was asked if she supported the Abolish ICE movement. You may recall this was back when our colleagues on the left, the Democratic Party, supported defund the police. She went even farther and said we ought to abolish ICE. That's Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Those are the folks who enforce our immigration laws. She said we need to start thinking about that from scratch. I guess that means when you start from scratch, eliminating all the laws that currently exist and replacing them with something new. But she was certainly willing to abolish ICE while she created something unspecified different. That same year, in a Senate hearing, she compared U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement to the Ku Klux Klan. How outrageous and irresponsible is that? These are law enforcement officers who serve the nation, put themselves in peril, in harm's way, and she said they are like the Ku Klux Klan? That says everything you need to know about how a potential Biden-Harris administration would approach illegal immigration and border security, including dismantling the very enforcement agency responsible for enforcing our immigration laws. Beyond that, Vice President Harris has advocated for a pathway to citizenship for the 11 million or so people in the country illegally. I also heard this weekend one of our colleagues, a senator from Massachusetts, say one of the things that she would anticipate from a future Harris administration would be establishing a pathway to citizenship for people here illegally in the United States. We also know she supports federal health coverage for undocumented immigrants. In other words, she wants all of us as taxpayers to pay for the health care of people who won't even respect our laws and who enter the country illegally. And she's demonstrated that she is all too quick to judge and vilify law enforcement. 3 years ago, mounted Border Patrol agents were trying to control a crowd of about 15,000 migrants near Del Rio, Texas. Del Rio, Texas is about 35,000 people. Can you imagine the chaos and the challenge associated with 15,000 migrants from Haiti showing up in this town of 35,000 people? Well, one photographer captured an image that went viral for all of the wrong reasons. The image showed an agent grabbing the back of a man's shirt while on horseback, while the horse's reins dangle on the side. At first glance, people like then Vice President Harris assumed the worst and accused the agent of whipping the man to the ground. But before the agency could even investigate the matter, she had attacked, disparaging the very law enforcement officials that are responsible for enforcing security at the border. She said these images evoked those of slavery and described the agent's behavior as horrible and deeply troubling. Had she waited to actually investigate the incident, she would have learned the facts, that there was no whip and there was no whipping. If she'd bothered to speak to the head of Border Patrol, she would have been told the same thing. But as reports indicate, the Vice President of the United States, who was appointed the border czar by President Biden, has never spoken to the head of the Border Patrol. Neither the current one or his predecessor. Think about that for a minute. If your job is to be the border czar, wouldn't that be the first person you'd talk to as the head of Border Patrol? Maybe to learn what you could about the problem and what you could do to help fix it. But she hasn't even bothered to talk to either the current or the previous Border Patrol chief. The fact is that Vice President Harris has played a key role in fueling the largest immigration crisis our country has ever seen. If she was able to accomplish that much as the Vice President and border czar, I hate to know what kind of damage she could inflict from the Oval Office. Madam President, I yield the floor. I note the absence of a quorum.